What's up, everybody? Welcome to Keeping Up with the Modern Classroom for our December 2022 episode, final one of the year. My name is Monte. I am a middle school science teacher in Washington, D.C.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Moon, she, her pronouns. I am an elementary instructional coach and interventionist here in Durham, North Carolina.
Hey, everybody, and I'm Tavia, he, she, her pronouns, and I teach science in Reedsville, North Carolina.
And we are so excited to have you join us today. Today, we're going to be talking about inclusive modern classrooms, which we're calling Including You and Me in 2023.
This is actually,
kudos to Sarah.
Thank you. This is actually our final show of 2022. I remember us doing our final show of 2021, and here we are doing our final show of 2022. So thank you to all of you that have been watching throughout the process. Thank you to all of you that are just joining in now, and we look forward to continuing this and including you and me in 2023. All right, let's go ahead and get started. And so when we're talking about building an inclusive modern classroom, we're talking about creating a space, building a space where all students feel supported intellectually and emotionally, and are extended a sense of belonging, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what they look like, regardless of their academic status, really making sure that that classroom is inclusive. And when we're thinking about that, there's a lot of different ways that we can do this. And I think I would venture to say that there's not necessarily one right way to do it. Instead, there's a lot of little ways that once you put them together, that really makes it accessible. And so the first one would be accessibility of instruction and content. Some of us might know this as universal design for learning. Is our content really designed so that everybody can access it, whether it be students that have unique learning needs, whether it be emergent bilinguals, whether it be students that prefer to learn in kinesthetic ways versus visual ways, just really making sure that that instruction and content is accessible. Another way to do that is making sure that our learners are represented within content. I know within the literacy world, we talk about this a lot, making sure that we have books that are not only windows into other worlds, but mirrors into our learners' world as well, right? So making sure that our learners feel represented within that content. Another way is making sure that we use inclusive language, including asset-based and gender-inclusive language. If you are not following us on Instagram and have an Instagram account, I highly recommend that you do. We had some of our expert mentors do a takeover and really focus on asset-based and gender-inclusive language, and you could watch that in that our Save Stories. And then lastly, making sure that we have some learner choice and voice. And so making sure that our learners are able to not only kind of choose and allow them to really think about what would be best for them intellectually and emotionally, but also have opportunities to lift up their voice. So that's kind of like a very broad overview. We're going to kind of dive deep and open it up to our panel and thinking about some questions that we see from our Facebook community regarding inclusive classrooms. Monte, I'll go ahead and read this question. Then I'm going to throw the ball over to you and Tavia. The first one is building all of these different paths and different choices is overwhelming. And Ray, my dog, is saying it can be overwhelming, and that's okay. You're not alone. But building all of these can be overwhelming. How can I make this work?
It is. It is a little overwhelming. That's no denying that. But I looked at it as once it's done. And tweaking is a whole lot easier than building from scratch. So once I've kind of built it how I want, because it's going to change depending on the class that you have, because what works for class A might not work for class B. But my theory is, and my drive is, okay, I know this is a lot. I know I have a lot of other things to do, but once it's done, it's done. I don't have to revisit it again. And another tip is take it slow. You don't have to do your complete course the first year. Focus on the heavy, I give a state mandated exam. So that was a big deal for the heavier topics, the topics that are going to be the majority of their exam. Those are the ones that I wanted to implement this in first. And then as I went along, I pulled in more and more.
I'll preface everything I'm about to say as just saying that I'm a crazy person. So I enjoy the creating aspect of doing the things. And I do agree, it is overwhelming, but it also is like one of my favorite parts of being a teacher is the creating aspect. When I first started this out, I started small, and that's always my recommendation for people. Start small. To me, the instructional videos are the most important piece. So if you only have time to record some instructional videos that you throw on Google Classroom and you don't have time to build anything else, I would say that you're winning in my book. Because to me, the instructional videos are the most important part. Now, if you don't have time to make the instructional videos, but say you have other stuff already made, I mean, YouTube, it has endless amounts of videos that are created. And again, Modern Classroom has research that shows that instructional videos made by you are more effective. But at the end of the day, when I don't have time to do something, like, for example, my kids are getting ready to learn about Ohm's law, I'm not recording a video on Ohm's law because it's Ohm's law and it's complicated. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't fully understand it myself. So we watch videos that are already made, and we talk about it together. And so I think no one should ever feel guilty about having to pull a video from YouTube that you use to balance your own. Just always start small. As Tavia said, you don't have to build out your whole course. Build out the pieces that matter. And if you have to do some stuff whole class, you totally can as you're working to build. But baby steps.
I think as well, something that I often talk with implementers about is, instead of thinking about having all of these different paths for different learners, to think about making one wider path. So for myself, my classroom, that looks like, if we're working on, let's say, a science unit, I'm going to have a wider path that might have multiple entry points, and students might either enter them at different times based on their level. That's more if we do like ELA or math, or just depending on their timing and their pacing. But everybody's working on one singular wide path, right? But everybody might be at a different spot in that path. And for me personally, that was a lot more sustainable to think of it that way. I think as well, when we're talking about different choices, I think we can be tempted, whether we are like Monte and we really enjoy the creating side, or whether we are like so many teachers and we're trying so hard to reach all of our students at all times, but to really think about just trying a couple choices, right? Like maybe I'm going to give them like something common that I always do for my end of unit projects is they can choose to show their knowledge at the end in a paragraph, poster, or presentation. And so I call those the 3 Ps, but those can be 3 choices that are really easy for me to implement. And then as I've gotten to learn classes, maybe sometimes I might want to add in this additional choice because that's kind of how my learners are that year. And so kind of what Tavia was saying, if you can build a strong base of a couple things and then kind of differentiate and customize according to that class that year, I think that can be a really sustainable way to make sure that we're including all of our learners. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, in addition to that, and I've also started recently using Google Forms, which my kids have gotten a lot of, like, I've gotten a lot of feedback that kids really enjoy it. We started off kind of with a doc. They didn't do well with it. We used slideshow, but same thing, they didn't really do well with it. And so I switched to Google Forms, and in Google Forms, you can actually create tracks where depending on what they select, or if like you have a mini quiz or whatever, you can actually have the form go to a different place. And so that's a super easy way that I've used recently just to give my kids choice in class. Like, for example, I have some kids who prefer to do all the must do assignments, and then they loop back to the should do assignments, and then they loop back to the aspire to do assignments. I have some kids who work in order of how I put them, and I have some kids who just like to bounce around. And typically it's not a major issue. Like, unless I want them to work in a certain order, I don't give them the choices in certain areas. But if you're wanting to give some choice, but you're not necessarily at a place where you can make these beautiful choice boards and stuff, Google Forms is like your way to go. And if we have show notes this month, I'll drop an example of one of mine so that you can see what it looks like.
Fabulous. That's fabulous. Awesome. Awesome. All right, let's go ahead and look at our second question. We hear a lot of iterations of this, so I'm excited to hear what all of us have to say. So this question is, my students are struggling to self-start any strategies, tips, or advice on how to better support my students. I'll go ahead and start off with saying that I think this is a opportunity for problem solving across the grade levels. I know I've experienced this in elementary. I know Monte has experienced this in middle, and Tavia has experienced this in high school. So my first thing would be to say, if you are experiencing this as an implementer, you are not by yourself. You are not alone. I think the main thing, and we've talked about it on some previous episodes, is really thinking about what is the explicit teaching that my learners need to know how to self-start, right? Even how to choose. I'm always surprised when I start doing an end of unit project for the first time with a new group of learners. And I'm like, all right, like I said, those 3 Ps, all right, which one do you want to do? And they're like, I'm like, which one? Which one would you like to choose? They're like, because they haven't, for many of them, they haven't been either given that opportunity, or they're just not used to the idea of really thinking about which one's going to be best for me, right? And so like one of the ways that I help teach with that choice is like, I will never choose a poster because I do not have an artistic bone in my body. It's not going to go well. It's just not. I'm going to get frustrated because my stuff is going to go to the side, and then I'm going to get more frustrated about how to show it versus like what I'm actually learning. And so I think really being explicit with that modeling when we're talking about, okay, when I say do your do now, what does that look like? When we're talking about choice, what does that look like? When we're talking about on pace, what does that look like? And really being able to scaffold that can be a great way to help students self-start. Monte, Tavia, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and like just like you do in your traditional class, routines are super important, even in like a self-paced class. So I follow pretty much a very formulaic formula every class. We always start off with a warm-up. The kids can expect that when they come in. They sit down, they grab their notebooks, they know to start the warm-up. We then do a discussion. And then I always, before I release them to do work, I always reiterate, review, and then I circulate. So I reiterate what we're doing for today. Like, this is what you should be working on. Here's what you should realistically have done by the end of class. I review any like major things that we need to review, and then I circulate. The kids that I know are not self-starters, who I start off with, go right to them, be like, what are we doing right now? And they'll be like, stuff like that. But I know that they're not, so I make sure to check in with them first. And once I see that they're consistently working, then I can move on to other kids. But sometimes they just need you to be like, what are we doing? And then they're like, oh yeah, this is what I'm doing. And I think that's totally okay. I don't think it necessarily means that they're not willing to self-start, but some kids just need that prompt to be like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be doing a thing, right?
So this has been probably the hardest year with getting kids to self-start for me. I've tried a couple of different things, and what it seemed to be working right now is stations, having them to kind of giving them their trackers and having them kind of do things from their seat wasn't really working. So I started doing the stations activities, and one of the stations was always a station with me. So they were kind of grouped strategically, and we would start class with something that they could take with them to each station, because all the different stations would look at different concepts from a different point of view. So we would do some kind of activity together that they would take to each station, and then they could work collaboratively with different people in their group. And then when they come to me, we talk about what they completed, what did they learn, that kind of thing, kind of like a wrap up. And it's cool because I can even group kids who are absent together. And so their conversation would look a little different when they got to the teacher station. And that has kind of helped get things more accomplished and get kids kind of working more on their own. So now they're signing up for what we have is called Pride Time. Now they're signing up for Pride Time because they want to do better and they want to work on their mastery checks and come get some more smaller group instruction.
I love the idea of stations. I just want to lift up before we move to our final question. Tavia kind of emphasized the importance sometimes of starting whole group, right? Like sometimes it can be really powerful to start with a whole group collaborative or inquiry-based activity, or even just starting off as like a whole group kind of check-in. Okay, where are we at? Where do we need to be? And then I also just wanted to lift up something that Monte said regarding sustainable goals and reasonable goals, right? I think a lot of times for me personally, I'll be like, okay, what do you want to accomplish today? And there'll be a learner that'll be like, the entire unit. And I'm like, I love that enthusiasm. It's not going to happen because that's not a reasonable goal. You're not going to be able to work that hard and do that, right? And so also just really scaffolding that skill of what is a reasonable goal, right? If I work really hard during a 60-minute period, what would be reasonable for me to accomplish? All right, let's go ahead and do our last question. Our last question is, I have too much to cover in my class. How can I prioritize creating relationships with students and making sure they learn everything they need to? And I forgot the punctuation, and I apologize for that. Monte, would you like to go ahead and start us off?
Yeah, I think, and this kind of highlights something that Tavia said, but one of the things that's like required in my class is I give them a signature sheet for every lesson. And on that signature sheet has the various tasks that are going to be completed in a lesson. And after completion of every single task, they need a teacher signature. And so part of the routine in my classes, and it also gets them moving and whatnot, is they have to get up off of their butt. They have to come over to the teacher station. They have to check in with me where I look at their work, and I get to have an individual conversation with every single kid. We joke around, we ha ha ha, we do whatever we need to while going over their work, and then they go back and they sit down. And I feel like that one-on-one is more than I would ever get in a traditional, like if I was just doing things traditional, I probably wouldn't get to have these one-on-ones with every single kid. And I feel like it honestly makes my relationships stronger. In addition to that, I think, especially when we have so much to cover, I think even if we have like all these benchmarks, there's pieces of our benchmarks that are not always necessary to like get to the end goal in mind. And that's where our lesson differing like classification is going to come into play. Like when there's something that I think is like really interesting and I want kids to learn, I throw it in there as an aspire to do. And I mean, most kids get to it. If they don't, it's not a big deal. So I would say, step back a little bit and really evaluate your content, because I'm sure there is some stuff in there that probably is not necessary unless you're teaching AP and IB and all those other things, and I don't teach those things, so I can't speak to that. But I know at the middle school level, like even when we feel like we have a lot of times I can look at a standard and be like, this part of the standard is actually not necessary. Let's make this an aspire to do.
Well, for me, I think building relationships should come naturally. Okay. So when I'm circulating, that's one of the things I found so powerful with the do nows. Because there's a part on there where it says anything you want to share. And I get responses, and that's something, a jumping point to getting to know those kids. And I walk up to them and we have different conversations. I make it a point to find out who are my athletes, and they fill out a student information form that only I see, and they can tell me anything they want. And I ask more personal questions, and they're actually kind of shocked that I actually read them. And I'll walk up to them, it's like, hey, you said you had 6 puppies. I'm looking for a puppy. Oh, really? What kind of, that's a good jumping off point. So even when they're working, building relationships is just a natural thing that should come, and it shouldn't take like a required, I would say it shouldn't. You don't have to set aside a required time to build relationships. Building a relationship doesn't have to be this overarching thing. It's just something small that you show that you care and that you are genuinely interested in what they have to say.
Yeah, and I think also, and speaking of relationship building, my husband just pulled into the driveway, so the girls might go off. So just be aware of that because they are very excited for him to be home. But I think also both of you have lifted up that extreme, not necessarily importance, but I think that extreme lift up of the idea that relationship building is organic throughout your time, right? Of course, we want to get to know our learners at the beginning of the year, but also we're not going to completely get to know them if we do 3 days of getting to know you activities, right? We're going to get to know them through those one-on-one check-ins, through those do nows. And I think also something that is super powerful in terms of building relationships is just implementing in general. I have students from my first year of implementation who are now in classrooms that are not implementing modern classrooms that email me and say, hey, I miss you and how you did class. Can you explain to me this? Can you record a video for this? And they are now in middle school. Because I think when we implement modern classrooms, when we really allow students and learners to self-pace and to really have control over their learning, that's a huge relationship builder, because you're recognizing them as an individual. You are trying to meet their needs as best as you can, and much more than traditional teaching ever would. And I think that goes a long way in building that relationship. All right. Well, we have had some fabulous discussion. Definitely check out our resource share. We have 3 goodies and possibly 4 if Monte is able to drop in that form that she was talking about. We have a podcast episode 58, if I remember correctly, about building equitable classrooms. An article from Cult of Pedagogy about uncovering implicit biases. And we also have our MCP accessibility guide. And if you've not checked that out, it has lots of resources and research all about how to really make sure that we are making our instruction as accessible as it can. Also, we will focus on goal setting in January 2023. So get ready for that. Monte, you want to go ahead and finish us out?
And as always, like us on all of our social media accounts and join our Facebook group if you're not already a part of it. And we will see you next month for our Twitter chat, which we do once a month on Wednesdays, first Wednesday of the month, 7 p.m. So we'll see you January for our Twitter chat.
All right, everyone.
Hilarious.
Thank you so much for tuning in again for 2022's year of Keeping Up with Modern Classrooms. We look forward to seeing you in 2023 and wish everybody a happy new year.